Good morning. This is Scott Amyx, and I'm joined by Eric Peck, CEO of Swoop Aero. Eric, welcome.
Thanks very much for having me, Scott. I appreciate the opportunity to be on the show.
All right, so it's actually morning in New York time, but Eric is joining from Australia, and it's midnight. So thank you so much for joining late your time and just keeping your energy level up for us. So the first question that I have for you is that you were in the Australian Air Force as a pilot and captain for 9 years, leading missions in the Middle East. Can you give us a glimpse into that career and just what it takes to succeed at that level?
Yeah, definitely. You're right. I was in the Australian Air Force as a pilot, and I left school. I went to the military academy to do an accelerated degree, so I did it in 2 years, and then jumped forward, went on a basic flying training, advanced flying training, and I actually got selected to be a fighter pilot. And I started going through fighter pilot training, but I got airsick when I was dogfighting, which was chasing the other plane. And it made it really hard to learn when I was actually on board the aircraft. So I kind of failed there, which was actually a really interesting lesson in and of itself. And from there, jumped over into the Hercules, where I trained up to eventually get captaincy, leading kind of a team of 10 on a 17-ton aircraft to fly missions in the Middle East at night, wearing night vision goggles, flying low level, kind of around the world. So this had this really rapid kind of growth into actually taking on like a real challenging leadership role in that context, and kind of realised that I kind of wanted to do something different long term, and so went back to business school and studied, and then kind of after 9 years left the Air Force and initially moved into management consulting before founding the company.
Terrific. Again, I think we in the civilian space really don't probably fully appreciate the level of stress and the pressure. Because I mean, when you go out to these missions, and especially in the Middle East, where there's potentially active war and combat, you're putting your life on jeopardy. And of course, the fact that you're, carrying potential, individual soldiers as well as weaponry, it's a lot. So how do you manage that level of stress and maintain that level of focus?
Yeah, definitely. I think one of one of the beautiful things that the military does really well is that they give everyone a really common grounding and a whole lot of strategic focus on where you're actually going as a group. And that strategic alignment is amazing. And then everyone has a base level of knowledge, and you build this really high performing team around you. So when you go into an environment like that, you've got this close knit team, you're working together really well. And you know that the person next to you, they've kind of got your back, and they know what they're doing, and you know what you're doing. And together you can go into this really tough situation and come out the other side of it. And I think that's kind of something that I've been trying to replicate. And I like to say it successfully in the startup, where you kind of take the kind of team dynamic of intricate trust between everyone in the team, and going into this environment, you're going to be able to make it out the other side no matter what's being thrown at you.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting angle that probably isn't covered enough in terms of just, that mission and value focus, but, the level of intensity and the team cohesion from a military level is very different from, let's say, an organizational. So being able to bring that level of dynamics and that dependency, team cohesion, like I said before, it's very difficult to replicate. What are some, I think, kind of core elements that help strengthen it and transfer it into whether it's a startup or a corporate environment?
Yeah, definitely. I think bringing that across is like, as you say, actually a real challenge. And it's something I almost considered going back and doing a PhD on, believe it or not, before I realized I wanted to go in a slightly different direction. But in terms of actually bringing that, effectively what we look for at the start in the hiring process is when we bring people on board, we're really hiring for culture more so than necessarily a skill sort of or a background. We kind of, once you've got the right people that are going to fit into that culture, you're going to be able to work really well, and they're going to want to be the kind of person that's building their own skills in the background to meet what you're actually doing. So It's kind of about, okay, how do we get the right people on board, and then how do we build a rhythm of how the company communicates in the same language, in the same way. We know, we run the same process every week, and put this rhythm around how we communicate, and then a really nice structure around it, so that when everything else is completely unstructured around you in this crazy startup environment, you have a baseline of structure and a rhythm and like a language of how the company talks. So trying to instill those kind of three key features, I think, is the way that we're trying to bring it into what we're doing at Swoop.
Well, Eric, I already sense that in a few years, whether it's 3 or 10 years from now, that I absolutely foresee that you're going to be on stage talking about how to build intentional organizational culture and bringing some of the best practices from the military space. So very exciting, and thanks for sharing that. And I'm not surprised that you wanted to, at some point, pursue a PhD in this area. So it's not surprising that, and quite fitting that you're still in the flying business. Now, of course, you're not flying it directly, but tell us why you decided to pursue airborne logistics using drones rather than, say, the typical kind of flying or passenger or other types of vehicles.
Yeah, definitely. So I was working in a management consultancy firm, and I met my co-founder. His name's Josh Tapper. He's a robotics engineer. He ran like a UAV consultancy on the side, and he's actually like a world drone racing champion. I think he was number 8 when I met him. So the two of us got together, and we were kind of asking some questions around the space and what we thought we could do, and kind of just almost just ideating at the moment. And then as part of that process, we actually got asked a question through one of the governments in a regional part of Australia. And the question was, could we move chemotherapy medication with a drone? And we kind of stood back and said, well, the answer is yes, that's actually technically possible. You can buy a drone that can fly the distance and carry the weight and do it once. But what does a system look like that can do that safely, reliably, and cost effectively every day of the week? And so with my background in aviation and kind of flying in the Air Force, and Josh's background in robotics engineering with a focus on unmanned air vehicles, we kind of said, let's build that system. And so we started doing it. We threw together some ideas and basically built that system, taking what I flew, which is a Hercules, like a 70-ton aircraft, and shrunk that down with this 15-kilo drone, rather than trying to build a toy drone into a delivery drone. And so we started building that. We patented a couple of ideas. That gave us a little bit of confidence that we were doing something that was actually heading in the right way, and it was unique. It was going to give us a competitive advantage. And then we started having really early customer conversations with healthcare companies and organisations, kind of either in the the donor or like the UNICEF's of World Health Organisations or the private healthcare companies in Australia, to validate that this was a real problem. And we kind of discovered that this is in fact a real problem. It's a problem that actually half of the world doesn't have access to basic healthcare, and that means that half of the world can't get penicillin with a week of it being diagnosed to them, which is quite an amazing thing to think about. And we worked out that the reason that's the case is because the way goods are moved at the moment, the current transport model is broken. And we saw this opportunity to be able to fix it by facilitating a move to on-demand logistics, and we can use the air to do that. And that's kind of how we funneled down this path. And so we raised a small bit of angel capital, built the system out, and then won the first competitive tender in the world of medical drone delivery ever released. That's kind of where I picked up about. We've been alive for 2 years now, and we kind of won that tender. We started our flying operations almost exactly 12 months ago.
Yeah, terrific. And I think for those of us that are in more the North America as well as Europe and Australia, we take certain access to healthcare and medication for granted. But in places like where you're operating in Africa, there are a lot of issues, access in terms of just affordability, and then physical access, which is what you're trying to address. And then there's a lot of it's a kind of manipulated system, based on some of the startups that I've seen, social ventures, where the intermediaries will procure some of these medicine and increase it by a significant amount to have a profit premium, and try to pass that on to the individual patients, and also there's some issues around quality and integrity of medicine, whether you're actually receiving the medicine that was intended versus some substitute that may not be as effective. So a host of issues. So talk to us about the business model around Swoop Aero and specifically the pair or the microeconomics.
Definitely. So what we actually offer as our services, we understand there's some real challenges in the healthcare health supply system in terms of that, what you're talking about with not being really sure if the medication that's getting at the national level is actually getting to people on the ground. There's a lot of players involved, particularly in the emerging countries where you've got governments and multiple NGOs and donors funding in. And then if you fast forward to like an Australian or a European or an American market space where you're basically interacting with a private healthcare company that have a large network already operating. And so we looked at all of this and we looked at the fact that we've built a system. And so we don't sell the aircraft themselves. What we do is we offer a managed service for a set monthly fee. And what that enables organisations anywhere in the world, whether you're the government of Vanuatu, whether you're an NGO in Africa, or whether you're a healthcare company in Australia or New Zealand, or potentially America, is the ability to slot that service into an existing logistics framework and get the benefit of being able to use the air to transport, high value essential products on demand, seamlessly integrate that into your current operations. And so what that means for us is that we're not approaching our customer base wanting to integrate into their supply chain at a really high level. We don't want to vertically integrate. We don't want to take over their storage or their supply. We just want to facilitate them being able to serve the people they're working for better. And what that means is that we kicked off our operations in DR Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, in July this year. And what that means in somewhere like DR Congo is that we can potentially offer someone the ability to get a resupply at their local healthcare centre once a day instead of once a month, which means they have better stock control, they have more products on the shelves, and the government and the NGOs can trust our service to completely redesign the healthcare supply chain in that area. And that's how we work. That's how we add value. And we have a really genuine belief that if we're focusing on adding that value to the end user, and we know it's real value in the healthcare space, that intrinsically creates value for us as a company.
Yeah, I got to believe that you must have by now some incredible success stories of how you've directly impacted the lives and the health of some of the individuals that are receiving some of this medication and vaccines. So maybe you could share just maybe one quick story, and then let's get into some of the more kind of longer term OpEx issues as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think we've actually got, like, right as I'm talking to you now, I'm watching this over to my right here, I'm watching a flight that's happening in Malawi. And so we kicked off our operations there about 2 weeks ago. We kicked off operations at Congo in July, but I think it all started in Vanuatu, which is it's a country that's made up of just over 60 inhabited islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And that's where we actually kicked off our first flying operation. And we had a story from March this year where it was about 9 o'clock in the morning. We got a phone call from a nurse at the opposite end of one of the island groups we were operating on. And it's about a 9-hour boat ride away. The nurse's name was Marie. And she said, we've got an emergency. Can you get the head nurse at the hospital to call me back? And we said, yeah, we can do that. She said, can you do a delivery like straight away? And we said, yep, we're ready to go. We've got everything. It was cool. And what it turned out, what had happened is Nurse Marie was in a town called Port Quimi, and she had a mother that had just given birth and needed a drug called oxytocin to help deal with some post-birth complications. And they can be really, really serious. And it's actually the number one cause of death for women in Vanuatu is post-birth complications. And so the mother had to either get on a boat with a newborn baby for 9 hours to get to the local hospital, or potentially use our service to get the drug to her within under 2 hours that she realistically needed. And so we got that call at just after 9 o'clock in the morning. At 9:35, the mother was being administered the drug that had been delivered by one of our aircraft. And I think that's one of our favourite stories, is that's how we can generate value in that marketplace, where the concept that they could have been able to get that within half an hour is just completely foreign. And only by kind of turning this logistics model on its head are you able to like unlock that value. It's kind of latent value in the system that can be unlocked, and this technology can be the catalyst for that to happen.
Yeah, I think the benefits are so apparent that I don't think it needs to be sold further. So let's talk a little bit about, like I said, the OpEx as well as competition. So on the OpEx side is that, and again, you guys haven't been operating for, let's say, 5-10 years, so you don't know for sure, but there's going to be undoubtedly some maintenance issues, right? So in addition to the CapEx, there you have issues around just ongoing maintenance of the drones. Sometimes you may lose signals. That could be an issue. Eventually, there could be some minor crashes, those sort of things, or even vandalization, or in some cases, maybe even get shot at. So how do you deal with some of the OpEx issues that could challenge, your cost structure potentially? The second part is the competition. This model exists, and there are other competitors that's doing something similar as well. So how do you guys actually stand out? And the last question, and again, we only have just a few minutes left, is once you actually figure out the airborne logistics, what you choose to deliver can be pretty broad. It can be other high value, low weight things as well. Small electronics like smartphones and other, very valuable things that can be easily delivered. How does that potentially change your business model years from now?
Definitely. So I'll start off on the OpEx side there, in that we understood very early on before we went into this, we built a unit economic model, and we kind of understood the cost structure that we needed to be able to achieve to actually make this a realistic service. So from day one, we had a cost per vehicle that we had to hit to be able to make this the service in and of itself actually cost effective. And we built to that from day one. And so what that means now is that we have a 4 to 6x CapEx advantage over our nearest competitor on a like-for-like basis for the technology. So for the physical piece of hardware itself, we're 4 to 6 times cheaper than our nearest like-for-like competitor in terms of the aircraft itself. And then the second bit of that is that we don't have any supporting infrastructure. So with some people rolling out operations, need to put a 20-foot container on the ground, or they set up a big hub with lots of expensive infrastructure, we can basically deploy 3 people with backpacks and 2 aircraft in bike boxes, and we can scale that up or down, or we can send that anywhere in the world in 72 hours. And so we can get a base set up and running within 3 days, and we can scale that as required. And so other than the aircraft, an iPad, and a box that we use to basically give ourselves internet connectivity anywhere in the world, we don't need any other infrastructure. And so this gives us a really big advantage in terms of that initial CapEx setup cost, but also the vehicles themselves are so cheap that we don't even insure the vehicles, because a lot of the time it's more cost effective for us to write off a vehicle than have any kind of safety incident come out of it. So if we get into a situation where we want to throw the aircraft into the water, because it's the safest outcome, the cost to us is so low that we can afford to do that. And so our real advantage here in terms of scaling out is that CapEx advantage. And that kind of intrinsically links back into the competitive space, where we're differentiating ourselves from the other competition in the market, in not only that we can take off and land vertically and fly forward, it gives us the ability to do two-way logistics. So a great example is a lot of the work we're doing at the moment in Malawi is picking up TB samples and blood samples for HIV testing, and bringing them back to a lab for testing in a laboratory. And we're doing the same thing in a couple of different places around the world. So we get the backhaul capability, so we can get better utilization of the asset itself in the air. And then that idea that we use very little infrastructure on the ground and we're very, very cheap gives us a cost advantage. So we've probably got 5 or 6 companies in the space that are working quite competitively here, and we're really driving that as our advantage, that we've built this system from day one to be infrastructure light and to be very, very cost effective from an asset perspective to give us the advantage in the market. And your third kind of question there about what does the future look like? And I think for us, what we see is that once we've got a backbone using the high value critical medical supplies moving around, we're slowly going to expand out, probably integrating a greater number of essential supplies being moved within that network framework. And so whether that's across an island group in Vanuatu, or whether it's across a big section of regional Australia, or it's in the Congo, or it's in Malawi, or it's in Mozambique, all of these places are then going to have this ability to move product in and out. And actually, we're fairly confident that in most of these places, we can saturate the network capability, probably from a community standpoint and a technical standpoint, just with pharmaceutical distribution and sample collection alone. And so we're kind of, what the future looks like in 5 or 10 years is significantly scaling up, and maybe some different vehicles and maybe a different approach about how we integrate into the airspace. But at the moment, what we're looking at is that we're going to be able to grow as quickly as we can with this medical supply space. And that's kind of what our real focus is at the moment.
Okay, so we only have 30 seconds left. Can you share with us your greatest product innovation failure? It can also go back to your Air Force experience as well, and the lessons learned from that.
Definitely. So I think I've got a really good one. When we initially started, we designed a really cool technical drone, and it took off and landed vertically and had all bits that moved around on it. And what we found is that was a really cool concept, but actually in practice, it was impossible to make it reliable enough that a user could actually use it. And then we stopped development of that, step back, ran through a product development cycle again, and realized that although it looked really slick and it had some cool patented technology on it, actually that wasn't what was going to be delivering value to the end user. And ultimately our customer needs to deliver value to the users. So the biggest value we had was we spent our initial months developing a product that looked really cool but didn't actually meet a customer need. And the key learning out of that was to always relate every single feature that we're developing from a hardware or software perspective back to an actual user need. So we're always developing a product that's actually needed by the market, and not something that is cool or has nice numbers behind it.
Terrific. So today I've been joined by Eric Peck, CEO of Swoop Aero. Thanks for joining, Eric.
Thanks very much, Scott. It's been a pleasure talking to you today.